What's good in the metaphorical hood, my jiggy niggas? And I have just watched the anime Sonny Boy. And let me tell you, it was, to say the least, interesting to a certain extent. It really was. Now, the anime was made by Madhouse, and you all know Madhouse. I mean, they made One Punch Man the first season. And they're really good animation studio, and it's by this director called Shingo Natsume. So, let's get into Sonny Boy and why overall it wasn't amazing, but it wasn't bad by any means whatsoever. And even though it was excellent in so many ways, we just say it was good. And I'll give my overall opinion, what I'll rate it, at the end. Now, the anime of Sonny Boy came out in July 2021, 19th of July 2021. Basically, a quick synopsis of what Sonny Boy is about. Sonny Boy is about this group of basically middle schoolers in Japanese, like the schooling system in Japan. These middle schoolers in their third year, they are taken to this black abyss in another dimension, and apparently God sent them there, and that happened, and they basically have to navigate their way through different dimensions, trying to find the way back, finding their way in relationships with each other. They all have superpowers in a very interesting way, and they all have to use that to basically survive, and if they can thrive and do what they can to get back and basically harmonize with each other. Now, the main characters that you'll see throughout the whole thing, the whole show, is a guy called Asake, who's he's not an antagonist by any means, but he's not a friend of the protagonist, but he's kind of, I don't like the protagonist, I'm just gonna be a classic bully type of thing, even though I secretly like the protagonist, but I'll make life harder for him in some ways, but he's important to the story and it affects the story very much. There's a girl called Mizuho, who's with the main character, is basically like his best friend for a lot of the time. Well, not from the beginning, but she becomes his best friend eventually. And there's a girl called Nozomi, who is his best friend until something happens to her, she dies. Then there's Nagara, the main character, who basically focused on the whole time, and we see his approach to everything, and he is the main character from the very beginning, is already extremely apathetic to all the events that are already happening around him. Before the event happened of them getting thrown into another dimension, he was already apathetic to life and the people around him and what is happening to him. Then he became apathetic to the situation that was involved in. So there could have been a lot of character development there, or maybe there was. Let's see. And there's a person called Hoshi, who is also pretty relevant to the story. He's a very good side character. Just generally a very good side character. Then there's Rajidani. That doesn't sound like a very Japanese name, and that's because Rajidani is an Indian student who's studying in Japan, who's also now Japanese living in Japan. Either way, that's why his name is Rajidani, who's the brains of the class. He's really intelligent. He's extremely important to the story because it can't do a lot without him, and he plays a crucial part in the end. Now, Sonny Boy, overall, how the structure was, you could say it was, the overall structure was one of kind of give the reader or the watcher, there's no manga for it, I don't think, but so give the watcher enough optimism to get them through the show, but as they're watching, continuously let them know, the watchers and the characters themselves, that misery is basically inevitable. Or maybe if that's too strong to say, you would say sadness and meaninglessness are just part of life. You have to get used to and have to get over to do things, even though most things you do won't matter. Somehow they also still do matter. It kind of had, that was what it was really about. The overall, that's what it was talking about. That's how every episode was structured. When you're just watching it, every single optimistic turn would take a heavy nihilistic, or every single optimistic road would take a heavy nihilistic turn, and it would just remind you as you're going that, hey, life gets tough sometimes, no matter the circumstance. And that was a heavy dose of realism as you're watching this, which is really interesting, because this whole anime is about people in another dimension, with other students going through other dimensions. All of them have superpowers, but that's so unrealistic. But that also, somehow, the way the director did it, it made it realistic, the way they interacted with each other. So even though it was a very abstract concept to begin with, the way the director brought it all together made it realistic, and how they approached everything in such humane ways, which is really nice. But also, at the same time, interesting enough, the whole social aspects of the series were not focused on. What I mean by that, like earlier I mentioned how they have superpowers. Everyone in the school, every student in this new dimensions have superpowers. And they're not superpowers like Superman, phew, or Wonder Woman type powers, super strength, flying, nothing like that. It was superpowers like, I can read your mind, or I can make you tell the truth, or I can create objects out of nothing, I can copy things, I can do stuff like that. Stuff that makes you, it won't put you in like immediate danger, it won't change your world. However, they're powers that will shape how you interact and communicate with the person, and what you'll need from them in order to get what you want. So they want like superpowers, but it was like powers to change social dynamics. But even though these were powers to change social dynamics, the social dynamic aspect was not explored almost at all. It was explored a bit when the character called Asaki's basically became like an idol for a lot of the students, because his powers are cooler than a lot of theirs, where he could basically destroy things and sometimes kill things if he wanted to, which was kind of superpowers, but not in the same way. That was the only time, seeing how the other students interacted with him and basically worshipped him over his powers, was the only time you saw someone's powers really change really affect them socially, like hard. Throughout the rest of the show though, everyone else's powers, it didn't really affect their social status at all. Even if it was like super useful or not, it wouldn't affect their social status or the way other people interacted with them, which is honestly like a miss. The anime could have gone down the social route and explored what the powers meant to each person, with how they use them, and how they interacted with each other with the powers. It could have been very good like that, but it's completely ignored, which honestly was a waste. But at the same time, I don't blame the director, because the path that he went on was exploring the whole finding yourself. This is a journey to find yourself. And yes, there is a social aspect to that, but not necessarily. And he didn't really go with that. You just find yourself through the things you see, the things you hear, the things other people tell you and experience, etc., etc. So it's that type of story. But through it all, again, there's just some anti-happiness element to this. Some heavy nihilism mixed with occasional optimism, just to keep things barely afloat. The story was almost so realistic that you even saw it at the beginning, how when the students were there in the new dimension, it took them so long just to set up rules to govern each other, to govern themselves, because no one wanted to do that, which showed a lot of human laziness. I mean, 2 months is an exaggeration, that type of situation, but still more relatable than if they immediately had ideas and everything to do exactly something to get out of that exact situation. This made more sense. Then after like about 6 months of hard work to find out how to get home, again, they gave up. Well, not again, but they kind of gave up and let anything and everything just like fly. Giving up after 6 months is what they do. Literally, like a lot of the class give up after 6 months of trying to find a way home. Like, we're never gonna find a way home. We're gonna stay in this dimension, these dimensions, exploring forever, and they all start to break out into groups. Oh, we're gonna go with these guys. The other people, we're gonna go with these guys. Then they're like, oh, we're gonna continue to find a way out. Then it's okay. They all split up. So even though they're in a situation they know that they need to work together, they try to work together, and they eventually, a lot just end up giving up and going separate ways. Which in that situation, that part was very unrealistic because most humans, I would think, would stay together in that situation. I mean, different dimension. You guys are now alone. You don't know how to get back home. You want to get back home though, but it seems these guys gave up on going back home too soon. Maybe. Then they gave up, and then the only characters left were the main one, Nagara, Mizuho, and the other best friend of theirs, and Rajadani. The other ones who left were like, okay, let's try finding a way back home, because we want to go back home. And when they broke out into groups, the way these dimensions are structured, it's like you could leave your friend in one place. You could go. For your friend, it would be 2 days since you've been gone. For you, it might be 200 years or 2,000 years. So time flew differently, or time flowed differently, whichever dimension you were in. And as such, for a lot of the characters, towards the end of the story, when they started, when they split up, then when some people got back together, for some it was like, oh, you've been gone we haven't seen you in like a year, and they'd be like, what? For specifically Rajadani, they didn't see him for a year, but for him it was 2,000 years. He was in a completely different state and place mentally than them. Mentally, those guys were still 16, 17. Rajadani was 2,017 years old. So he didn't feel the same attachment to going back to Earth as they did. He barely even remembered his life before the dimension at all. And now they're still trying to go back to their dimension. He's like, I don't care anymore. And he became very noticeably apathetic, slightly slow. But overall, he remained completely the same in his approaches to everything. The only difference was he was a bit more eccentric with his physical movements, but that was it. Slight apathism, sure, but mostly more centered with physical movements. Not really any difference or character development or character degradation whatsoever, actually. He remained generally pretty stable. And with other characters, all of them eventually, a lot of them, except two, well, one died. They all just accepted they were there forever, like I said before, and then they all ingratiated themselves into different dimensions, and then split off from there into even smaller groups, and then split off from there to some going on their own, some staying in groups forever, some getting lost forever, and situations like that. That's now towards the end, and now you, from the beginning of a class of 36, now you're just down to 2 people, or 3 people, or just 4 people. Yeah, there's 4 people who really have their minds still together. Because the others were like, now, for their time periods, were thousands and thousands of years ahead, that when in the different dimensions that they were in, they completely ingratiated themselves into those dimensions and quite literally became a part of them. Or, if they didn't become a part of a dimension, they just kept wandering forever aimlessly. So, from the beginning, that whole kind of optimism of getting back to Earth, then now is this severe, and they became this in the middle, this nihilism of never going back, then begrudging acceptance. Then there's only hope for these 2 individuals of she died, for Nagara and Mizuho. These are the only 2 where they maintained, we want to go back home. Now, even though they were the only 2 wanted to really go back home, as you're watching this, you see that, hey, even though they do want to go back home, they're very nihilistic about it. They know that might not happen. But they even talk down to themselves, it probably won't happen, it's not going to happen, etc., etc., etc. They almost to a point give up on it, but they still keep going, which is admirable. It's very human-like. Knowing you just most likely will fail, but you still keep going. That was very impressive. But at the same time, again, you can still sense that severe nihilism in the air throughout the whole show. There's that begrudging optimism and just severe nihilism throughout. Of nothing really matters, but everything matters. The characters even say this themselves. Nothing really matters. Why are you going there? This doesn't matter. Why are you doing that? This doesn't matter, etc., etc. And then later on, they'll be like, "This matters because at least you're doing it. This matters because we can try our best. We can still try our best. We can still do this. We can still do that. This matters. This matters." And that's very interesting and telling, really. And eventually, it ends when Nagara and Mizuho try going back to Earth. They almost reach it. They're about to reach it. Then they get interrupted by Asaki's, who's kind of the antagonist. Not really, but kind of ish. He's making one last effort to stop them. And while Nagara and Mizuho were on the way back to Earth, go back to their dimension, he let them know that basically thousands of years had already passed in the different dimensions. So what was hours for Nagara and Mizuho was literally thousands and thousands of years, not hours, sorry, years for Asaki's and the rest of the people. Even to the point where their original dimension, the original land that they landed on, was no longer even there. It was covered by water. And Asaki's even mentioned how Rajdani had actually reached a dimension, stayed there, and became one with the dimension and became an island. Evolved into an island, which is an interesting concept. And how others have simply just drifted away or just disappeared, gone. And he was really the only one left. At least with the same thoughts, the same mentality he had all those thousands of years ago. And and he says to them, and Asake says to Nagara and Mizuho, "Hey, after knowing that, do you really still want to go back? I mean, there's no real point if you do, because you've just been replaced. And there's no real point if you stay." They say they still want to go back. He's like, "Okay, and there's no real point for me to stop you." But now he's the only one left who's actually conscious of anything, and that's very sad. There's other students of other generations in the different dimensions, sure, but Asake for the most part, is now alone. So Mizuho and Nagara leave. They make it back to their dimension, and you would think, after mentally changing literally 2 years for these two characters, mentally going through hardships like that, having to get along with people, having to survive, having to do a lot of hard studying and research to get back to where they were, you'd think that have different perceptions in life, different approaches to doing things, different everythings or anythings. They did not. When they got back, they were almost the exact same as before they even left. Nothing had really changed for these characters. Almost nothing. No real personality changes. No real approach changes. Nagara was still the same impassive, shy, easily bullyable, you could say, easily influenceable character he was 2 years ago. And Mizuho was still the same isolationist, standoffish, super tough girl she was 2 years ago. And sure, they talked with each other about moving on in life, doing their best, but for the most part, they really did remain the same. Nagara never stood up for himself in any way, never really did anything for himself to improve himself, except when he was in those different dimensions. And even when he was going through the dimensions, he never showed none of the characters really showed any hard character progression. Even Asake, from the very beginning, the way he approached everyone else, that's how he was towards the end as well. No one, even though for him thousands of years had changed at that point, he was still the same. No one had really grown. No one had changed. No one had even gotten worse, personality-wise speaking. Everyone was just the same. And there's a certain sadness in that. Although, after going through all that, you still can't change. But at the same time, they recognize this, and then they say, even though I'm changing slowly by slowly, I'll still do my best. Even though I'll fail, I'll still do my best. It's basically what they're now saying towards the end of the show. Even though things don't go my way, I'll still do my best. Even when things go wrong, I'll still do my best. And things will go wrong, and things like bad stuff will happen, but I'm still gonna keep doing my best. And there's a lesson there. Yeah, do your best, even though you know it's gonna suck, and you might lose most likely. But at the same time, what is the point of the whole adventure if at the end none of the characters really changed? This was an anime that was really just about showing what nihilistic optimism is and how it can display itself in humans and how humans can really interact with each other, I guess, for their own purposes. You could say it was just an anime for, like I said, nihilistic optimism. I don't know how else to put it. There wasn't any really grand arcing theme, no real life changing information that could have happened from any of the characters. It was just, this is sometimes how humans are. This is how life is. Sometimes big things can happen, no one notices, and your life doesn't change. And sometimes you just have to move on with it. I don't see any grand big reason for anything in it. Anything. Even at the beginning, when they find out that the person who sent them to the other dimensions was God, apparently God became the principal of the high school because he can. And he sent them to the other dimensions because he can. And he decided, hey, you're gonna stay there because I want you to stay there. And even the two characters made it back, nothing really changed. Everything was about the anime was just because I can, because it's there. There's no real, because it's there, here's what's gonna happen, and here's the thing, and here's the overarching theme, here's the overarching element. There's just nihilism, optimism mixing in. And it's interesting because the slogan of the show in the trailer was like, quote unquote, a new journey to find ourselves. But throughout the whole thing, I can swear, none of these characters really found themselves in any way. Except maybe Rajdani. But he didn't need to find himself because he was always, you could say, at a stage of excellence mentally. He was always satisfied with himself. He never needed validation from anyone. He always took criticism well. He always took compliments well. He took everything. He was a very well-balanced individual. He was well-balanced throughout, even towards the end. So it's not really about finding yourselves, because no one really found themselves at all. None of the characters, I would say, found themselves deeply. All of them explain their history and a lot of bad stuff that happened in the dimensions, and a lot of conflict, yeah. But none of them actually found themselves. No one really explored what it does mean to be me in these new dimensions. What do I want? What does it make of myself? Well, there's none of that. It's just, here we are. Here's what's happening. Here's the attitude we have. The attitude remains the same throughout. I'm back in the real world. Everything remains the same, but it's okay. I'll keep on trying my best. Done. So that was extremely underwhelming, but at the same time, excellent. It was excellent creatively. It was creatively excellent. Very creatively excellent. However, story-wise, yeah, I'll give it a 6 out of 10. Creativity, 10 out of 10. Overall, I give it I feel comfortable giving it a definite 7 out of 10. This Sonny Boy was a definite 7 out of 10 for me. It definitely wasn't 8. It definitely wasn't 6. Because 6 is just getting by 5. And no, Sonny Boy wasn't just 5. 5 is halfway. And Sonny Boy wasn't just fine. 6 is just above average. And it wasn't just above average. It was noticeably above average, but it wasn't 8, which was like super great. It was just good. Sonny Boy was good. It was a good anime. If you're looking for a good anime, then Sonny Boy's it. It's just a good anime. A very pessimistic, nihilistic, optimistic, good anime. If you can handle hard nihilism, hard optimism, like I would say 60% nihilism, 30% optimism, 40% optimism, then yeah, you'll enjoy Sonny Boy. But if you're watching this video right now, I assume you've already watched it. I mean, this is a review, so yeah. Thank you for watching. Well, thank you for listening and watching. Yeah. Um, it's my first time doing a video like this, but I do hope you enjoy. And in the future, I do hope to do more like this. So yeah. Quick side note, sorry. If you're looking for an anime which is like Sonny Boy, but not really like Sonny Boy, then I recommend NHK ni Yukuso. Some of you may know that. And NHK ni Yukuso is essentially an anime where it does have a lot of hard realism, and hard nihilism, but it always takes a very positive turn somewhat, and always gives hope to the character and the watchers and the viewers. And for those who want like hard realism with hard hope and hard nihilism intertwined, and I would say which is very relatable, depending on the person. If you're stuck in, I'd say, hard financial times or in a creative rut or feeling stuck in life, then you might just relate to it quite a bit in some ways. I recommend it.